following the launch of the Self-Assessment Scorecard and Guidance. My name is Zami, I'm Senior Program Manager at Shiva Foundation, and I'll be your host for today. It would be really great to see who is in the room. So if you haven't done so already, please do introduce yourself in the chat with your name, role, location, council, charity, wherever you're from. It'll be good to see who else has joined us today. This webinar will focus on the second and third themes within the Self-Assessment Scorecard and Guidance, which is internal awareness training and modern slavery leads. For those that do not know, Shiva Foundation worked with the Beacon Club and Stop the Traffic to create a resource, both a scorecard and the guide, that allows local authorities like yourself and other public sector bodies to assess a modern slavery risk. During the first half of the presentation, I'll take you through the main elements of both the scorecard and guide, how the points are calculated for those who haven't used it, what the value of the resource is, before I hand over to our guest speaker. And I can already see people adding their names and titles in the chat, so that's really good to see. Okay, so in terms of an outline, we will be focusing on a couple of things. Firstly, I'll provide a brief overview of the scorecard and guide. Then I'll introduce the two themes that are the focus of this webinar, being awareness training and modern slavery leads. And then I'll introduce our guest speaker, Nicola Bell, who is from Oxfordshire. Really excited to hear her speak. And then we will have a Q&A. Throughout the presentation, if you do have any questions, please do put them in the Q&A function. So not in the chat function, the Q&A function, and then we'll reel them off at the end of the speaker slot. So please do feel free to add as many there as possible. Next slide. So for those of you who have not heard of the Self-Assessment Scorecard and Guidance, I'll give you a very brief overview of what it's about. It's split into two elements. So firstly, you have the online scorecard and questionnaire, which you can see on the left. So that's an online form that you fill out, and it's made up of 12 main questions and a few other sub-questions, and it's scored out of a total of 400 points. And on the right-hand side, there is a screenshot of the full supporting guidance, which I'll take you through just in a bit. To get the most out of the resource, we highly recommend that you do both at the same time, or you use both resources at the same time, because they're there really to support one another and, you know, to be able to understand how to answer the questions in the scorecard. The guide provides that assistance or more information on how to do that, and vice versa. So it's something that we really encourage organizations to use together. So in terms of how points are calculated, when you've completed the scorecard, your score will be displayed alongside a very brief paragraph of which bracket you fall into. So you would either get a score between 0 and 175 points, which means that your organization is at a developing stage in relation to mitigating modern slavery risks. If you score between 176 and 300 points, your organization is at an advancing stage. And if you score between 301 points and 400 points, your organization is at a leading stage. And even though you're given an overall score, you're also able to be scored according to each theme as well. So it's a little bit more complicated than just an overall score for your entire organization, although you are given one so you can match how you do over time. So onto the guidance. As mentioned, the guidance should be read alongside the scorecard, and it's quite a long resource, and we don't expect you to read it cover to cover. We hope it can be used as a resource that you continually refer back to as you're answering questions. So going to the specific section in the guide for guidance on how to answer a specific question in order to get the right amount of points, or guidance around a specific theme that your organization might be focusing on at a time. There are 3 sections in the guide, and I'll talk through what each of those sections are. But the guide contains details around 8 key themes, which run across the 12 main questions that you'll come across in the online scorecard. And then lastly, as I mentioned, you'll be given a final overall score, which will fall into one of those 3 brackets that I spoke about earlier. So in terms of the 3 sections, the first section of the guide is used, contains the background of the project, why we decided to do it, and is information around how to use the guide and scorecard itself. The second part of the guide contains all the information around the 8 key themes and really is the main bulk of the guide where you find all the guidance around those key themes. And then the final section is the annexes, and it contains a list of all the questions that you could possibly come across in the scorecard. Guidance around research we did around local authority statements. You have the findings of the self-assessment, or the findings of the risk mapping exercise that SDT did, and we'll hear a bit more about next week as well. So there are a nice few additional bits of resources for people that want to have a bit more of a holistic understanding of the information and the methodology holding up the piece of research. So like I said, there are 8 key themes that were prescribed. The first webinar we had on Tuesday looked at modern slavery statements and policies. This webinar will run across 2 key themes: internal awareness training and modern slavery leads. So that will be the focus of this particular webinar, and our guest speaker will touch on those areas. Before I hand over, I do want to give a bit of an overview of what these 2 areas look like in the guide itself, so that it's a bit familiar to you once you go back to it. So in terms of internal awareness training, this section provides a very brief overview of awareness training and covers access to training, an overview of what should be included in training, the importance of having tailored training for specific departments, especially for frontline, for people on the front line. It's then followed by 3 tables. So you have the developing, advancing, and leading tables. As I mentioned, even though you would get an overall score that will, place your organization in one of these brackets, each of the themes also has a table, a set of tables that corresponds to whether you're in advancing, leading, or developing. And these tables are there to provide you with tailored guidance on developing and running training internally. In terms of what are the key elements a leading organization will be doing in relation to training, we talk a little bit about having compulsory training, what your training should cover as a leading organization, why training for frontline staff should be tailored for specific departments, having opportunities for in-person training, ensuring that knowledge is tested and refreshed on a regular basis, and we flesh that out a bit more in the leading table of this section. Moving on to modern slavery leads, in this section we cover the importance of having a modern slavery lead or team, staff awareness of who that person or team is, and developing the expertise of that person or the team. Again, these tables that follow in this section provide you with tiered guidance on developing this role within your organization and the expertise as well. In terms of what key elements you would need to be a leading organization in this area, we look at having dedicated resource focused solely on modern slavery, ensuring all staff members knows who that modern slavery lead or team is, having stakeholders from various departments working together to mitigate modern slavery risks, as well as upskilling that team regularly and having their knowledge tested and upskilled on a regular basis. So that's a very brief overview of the 2 themes that we'll be looking at. I would love to hand over to Nicola Bell, who is the anti-slavery coordinator for Oxfordshire and are very seasoned in this area.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I really welcome this opportunity to speak about what we're doing in Oxfordshire that fits into 2 of the themes that Dami's just spoken about. I am going to start with the modern slavery leads part first, because then I'm going to go into the training after that, just so it flows better. So just a bit about me. I've worked around modern slavery for 10 years now, but previously my roles have always been around setting up and running support services for victims of exploitation and slavery. Now my new role as anti-slavery coordinator for Oxfordshire is the first time I've worked in a statutory service and certainly for a local authority, but using the knowledge I've gained from working directly with victims of slavery has helped me settling into this new role and what's needed in Oxfordshire to respond to slavery. Okay, next slide, please. Okay. So what I'm going to look at is I've been in post for just over a year now, and it's a new post. I'm employed by Oxford City Council, but I cover the whole of Oxfordshire, so I work with every local authority in Oxfordshire. And one of the key roles of local authorities that we have to do is identification and referral of victims, supporting victims, community safety and disruption, and supply chains free from slavery. So based on these themes, it was felt in Oxfordshire that there should be a role dedicated to responding to these themes for Oxfordshire, and how that can all fit together. So although this is a local authority and I am the lead for local authorities, we've also developed the role so it's more working in partnership with other agencies. So anybody in Oxfordshire, whether that's NGOs, other statutory services like police, or even members of the public. For us, it's about delivering this and being the lead for everybody in Oxfordshire, and all working together to respond to modern slavery in Oxfordshire. Next slide, please. Okay. So when I first started in this role, I looked at what was needed, and I have to say the model that we've used in Oxfordshire is based on Sandwell Council in the Midlands. They had a really good model that my manager had gone to speak to them about, and then made me aware of it, and I spoke to them, and we felt that was the best model to replicate in Oxfordshire. So we've used what Sandwell were doing, but also added our own, what's more relevant to Oxfordshire for us. So the first thing was to set up a multi-agency structure, because we feel in Oxfordshire it is key that is a multi-agency approach. No one agency, no one person can lead on modern slavery. So this is how our structure in Oxfordshire works. So governing the whole multi-agency protocol is our Oxfordshire Sabre Community Partnership, because in a lot of local authorities, modern slavery will sit in community safety, because obviously it's a crime. Then we have myself as the anti-slavery coordinator who feeds into that partnership. We also have a modern slavery strategic group, where our modern slavery strategy and delivery plan is looked at by the group, so I also report to them. Then under that, we have a multi-agency structure in how we respond to modern slavery in Oxfordshire. And within that structure, there's me at the top of it. Then we have our anti-slavery multi-agency response team, which is referred to as ASMART. And that is a virtual group of key partner agencies. And in that group, we have representatives from Health, the Gangmasters Labour Abuse Authority, DWP, Adult Safeguarding Team. We have representatives from Migrant Help who deliver the outreach NRM support in our area, and we also have our local victim support service involved as well. And we have the Thames Valley Police lead for modern slavery on that group as well. We meet every week and we discuss cases that have come in, and it's all about sharing intelligence for each department. That group will look at any indicators and decide what the next step is, and that usually is looking at whether it's a single agency approach. So it may mean that there's no multi-agency response necessary, but 9 times out of 10 the group agree that a multi-agency response is needed, and that's when it goes to ASMARAC, which is the Anti-Slavery Multi-Agency Risk Assessment Conference. So it is based on the MARAC model, but it's an ASMARAC for each individual case. And from that, we will invite the relevant agencies we feel need to be sitting around that table. So it could be anybody supporting a victim, it could be other agencies within local authority departments that are needed, such as environmental health, business regulation, etc., fire service, anybody who we feel can have an input into our response to this particular case. On the back of those, we have the Oxfordshire Anti-Slavery Network, which is held every quarter, and that's anybody from across Oxfordshire, NGOs, statutory services, will meet every quarter. We have set themes, speakers who come, but the network tend to lead on a lot of our delivery plan in Oxfordshire. And then out of the network, we also have an anti-slavery working group who will work on particular prevention things that we do in Oxfordshire. So once this was set up, we then developed a guidance and pathways document for all frontline services in Oxfordshire. So this is a document that explains what modern slavery is, indicators, some resources, but also what our structure is and what the pathway is if you identify a victim of slavery. Next slide. So this is the process. So all alerts of slavery are received by myself. So people know who I am now thanks to the guidance and pathways. So it can be a concern of an individual, a business, a premises, anywhere where there's any concern of potential modern slavery or exploitation, I'm alerted to. Then, as I said, that is discussed at our ASMAT, and then we decide whether that needs a multi-agency response. That's organised, and from the ASMARAC, all the actions are developed. So whether that's disruption activities, so that could be a multi-agency operation that needs carried out, and also at ASMARAC, it's identified who's going to lead on what area, who needs to do what, and make sure all our processes are being followed. So the ASMAT, the ASMARAC, and all the actions are all coordinated by myself. Next slide, please. Okay. So what is my role? And I think this highlights why it is important to have a modern slavery lead. Myself working previously in victim services, but also working with local authorities and statutory services. A lot of pressure is put on workers, professionals that have to look out for everything, and you can't be an expert in every area, and you do have your own job to do. So that is why I personally feel, and certainly doing this role, is you need that one single point of contact that people can go to, they know who to go to, who can then coordinate what needs to happen. So my role is I am that single point of contact for everyone. So whether that's the multi-agency partnership, anybody within the local authorities, any NGOs, the public, literally anybody in Oxfordshire where there's concern of exploitation. I coordinate all the alerts, referrals, and any agency intelligence as well. So that could be that sometimes from ASMAT, all the intelligence we get, I coordinate all that. So if there's any information from any of that intelligence that we need to alert somebody else to, then I can coordinate all that. I have an oversight of all cases of exploitation, just adults, because children's is dealt with separately. And the importance of that is prior to that, in Oxfordshire, there was no real understanding of what the prevalence was or what it looked like in Oxfordshire. So I record everything centrally. I keep a central database, so everything that comes in is recorded. And the database, again, we were looking at what do we need to record. So we record victim details, what which area the exploitation took place, whether it was trafficking or the demographics, age, gender. We sometimes, if the suspect's known, so then again, we can plot what we're going to do to disrupt things. We look at what type of exploitation it is, and we have like classification categories as well. So even if it's criminal exploitation, well, what is that? Is that cuckooing? Is it county lines? Is it forced begging, shoplifting? Again, so we can really look into what is happening in Oxfordshire. So again, being the lead in that and having that all information, everybody knows to contact me if they need any data around modern slavery. And from that data, we can assess the threat, risk and harm in Oxfordshire. And by doing that as well, that helps us develop disruption plans, intervention plans and prevention plans. And that single point of contact, people can ring for advice, you know, just contact me about everything. So some people will ring up advice, they may be not sure if it's modern slavery or exploitation, or they're not sure what they need to do within their role. And, you know, the feedback I get that people are more likely to deal with the situation of modern slavery because they feel more confident knowing there is somebody they can go to, rather than be feeling unconfident in dealing with the situation because they don't have enough knowledge of modern slavery. What I also do is ensure that the correct processes are in place and followed, and that can cover a multitude of things. So, you know, when I get alerts in, I've got a bit of a checklist. So has intel been provided to the police? If not, I will submit intel to the police to ensure that they've got all the information. Has a safeguarding referral been made? And if not, I will do that as well on behalf of somebody. But it's also for organisations. Do you have a modern slavery strategy? Do you have it in your safeguarding policies? So I've sometimes helped people develop policies and procedures, or given them text to put in their policies and procedures around modern slavery. So again, it's kind of auditing people's processes and policies to make sure they are covering themselves. And also that helps making sure people are meeting their duties, their statutory duties around modern slavery. I also assist in safeguarding potential victims. So again, making sure they've got support. Have they been referred to the NRM? Have they been referred to our support service locally? Do they need moved out of area? So again, it could be that I help coordinate that move, like by contacting other local authorities. And one of the things I have noticed is that because people are aware of your role, or you say you lead on the modern slavery response in Oxfordshire, I'll be honest and say that it seems to give me more weight. Whereas when I was running support services, maybe contacting somebody from housing in a local authority, they wouldn't really engage with me. So I think having a modern slavery lead gives that weight for things to be discussed with them, and for people to work and engage with them on support and potential victims. Obviously there to support agencies, organisations, again, in whatever capacity that is needed. Every agency is different. Some people only need a little support, other people need a lot of support from the start to the finish. I'm not saying I do everything for everybody, because there is only me and I am covering a county. But again, it is signposting it, it's telling people what they should be doing, making people accountable, and making sure those responsible for certain tasks are doing what they should be. As I've said, I plan and coordinate any disruption activities. So in trying to disrupt a forced labour case recently in a hotel, I coordinated and planned the multi-agency visit to that hotel. They're involved lots of different agencies, because sometimes with modern slavery, if you don't have enough evidence for that, but you need to get into a premise, to be able to engage with victims, or to seek further evidence, that multi-agency joint approach is key, because there's other agencies that have the powers to get into places. So we often do visits with the fire service. So again, it's things like that working in partnership and coordinate and all that. Operations like that or multi-agency visits are quite sometimes on a large scale, and it takes a lot of planning. So I think if you don't have somebody leading and coordinating that, people sit around and think, well, whose responsibility is it? Is it the local authority? Is it the police? Actually having that lead kind of gets rid of all those questions, and that person's role does have the capacity to coordinate all that. I can assist with NRMs or duty to notifies, and again, that's part of that process, ensuring that victims have been offered that, and if adults haven't consented, then has a duty to notify being done, because again, as local authorities or other statutory services, we do have a duty to notify the Home Office of potential cases. On from the NRM, another key point of having a lead is that if that's their only job, so again, using my role as an example, this is my only role, modern slavery and exploitation is my expertise, so I will keep up to date on everything modern slavery. So with recent changes to the NRM, because of the local Nationality and Borders Bill, the changes that may come due to the illegal migration bill that's currently going through, I keep up to date on that so I can share that information with everybody. Again, if you haven't got that one person keeping up to date with everything, it's a lot to ask of other professionals on top of their own main job to be able to keep up to date. So again, it's being able to disseminate changes in legislation, changes in guidance, having that one person who can completely look into that all. Obviously, training is another one, and I do believe personally that training is essential, internally and externally, and what we offer in Oxfordshire is there is a training strategy, and basically that looks at what position you may have in your job as to what level of training you require. So it could be just e-learning training if you're not really going to come into contact with potential victims. We offer general awareness. I think everybody has to have that general awareness to have that sound understanding of what modern slavery is, what trafficking is, the indicators. You need to have that general awareness training first and foremost. Then on from that, we then offer that bespoke training. So people have had to have gone on the general awareness training before any bespoke training is done. And by bespoke, we mean what's relevant for each department or organisation. So for example, in a local authority, everybody will have our general awareness training, but then each department will have a little add-on training, and it's maybe only about 30 minutes to an hour that's specific to their team or department. So for example, housing, this is what you will see, this is where you may come across it in your role, and this is what your responsibility is. And then obviously we'll discuss around the legislation and guidance around homelessness and housing under the Modern Slavery Act. So the bespoke training is very specific to the departments. For example, in procurement, again, we'll have the generalist awareness training, but procurement will have a different training because it's more around supply chains, and what they need to know and the legislation they need to know will be different to somebody in housing. So it's ensuring that everybody within their role has that relevant sound knowledge of modern slavery that's appropriate for them. And then I've put anything else there, so people ask me lots of different things, and I'm sometimes known as the lady who never says no, but again, that's what my role is. Where are the gaps? And I only sometimes know where the gaps are if people are raising things. So basically anything else that I can help with. And if I don't know it, then I will know where I can signpost people to. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry, next one. Okay. So one of the things I wanted to do in this presentation, and when I spoke to Dami prior to it, was show why having that multi-agency structure, because although we're talking about modern slavery leads, part of that leading is that multi-agency coordination, which I think is absolutely key to our success in Oxfordshire at the moment. And so a lot of the partners we work with, like key partners, we kind of asked for feedback as why do you think it's important to have, like, my role in Oxfordshire? And so one of the first bits of feedback was around, well, that development of that multi-agency structure so that nobody's working in silo, and that it's a joined up approach, because what people have felt previously is everybody's got their own remits and agendas. They go off and do their bit, but then something else falls through the gap. So the police might do their bit around enforcement, but then the longer term support for victims might not be there. So having that multi-agency approach means we can look at every single aspect that needs covered, allocate a task to somebody, and then we constantly come back together until we've come to an end and we can close that case. So it's making sure nothing falls through the gaps, nothing's missed, and that basically up until the end victims are supported, safeguarded, and basically can then continue on to a better life out of exploitation. So these are some of the feedback. I mean, I'm not going to go through all of it, but again, I can say why I think it's important to have a modern slavery lead in an organisation or a county or whatever, but actually other organisations, I think it's really important to hear from them about how it benefits them. So allows the sharing of intelligence, that information sharing that maybe normally wouldn't happen between organisations, and then that can help be preventative in everybody's line of work. The safeguarding team who sit on our ASMAT, they said for them it's very clear, so they're aware of people who may have social care and support needs that then they can pick up and support and do their bit with. But for them, what's really important with these multi-agency meetings is that those who don't have care and support needs, which quite a lot of victims of modern slavery and exploitation don't, they know and are confident there is another pathway through this new structure that means that victims still get that support and are less likely to fall through the gap. Most people said that knowledge and expertise, just having that one person who knows everything there is to know about modern slavery, can keep up to date with changes, and then share that. They said that is absolutely valuable, because they said they can Google and everything, but then that takes a long time, whereas they can ring me and within 2 minutes we've sorted it or I've answered the questions. And one of the biggest thing, and I think that shocked me and that I never thought of, was a lot of them said they now have the confidence there is that response to slavery, where again previously they might have raised it with somebody like, say, the police, but because of the intel system, like, you don't necessarily get told what's happening. So they might have reported something and then not know what the outcome was, whereas through this structure, they get to see it from beginning to end, so they know and are confident that there is that response now to modern slavery. Next slide. Again, one of the other biggest things that came out, and what I've seen a lot of, is when we meet in ASMAT, obviously there's different organisations there that may have different information. And by sharing that information, what's sometimes highlighted is maybe another issue, but within a certain department, if you like. So, for example, a recent case we were discussing, when we were sharing information, one of the other organisations looked on their system and it flagged up that a certain address had been used 50 times in the past 2 months. So again, that flagged up more potential that there's more going on than what we thought. So we're looking into it further, but also for that organisation, they are now looking into their sides of it around fraud, potential fraud. So what we're finding is we may be exploring exploitation to start with, but what it also aids is other disruption activities. So again, on some of the multi-agency visits we've done, immigration have been involved, and people have been fined, so they've kind of done a bit of disruption their side. Environmental health, there may be food safety issues, then they're fined, and so it also helps other departments and organisations with their disruption and making sure everything on their side is running okay. I think the key theme that came out from everybody who I've spoken to is that now we have a better understanding of what the concerns are, what it looks like in Oxfordshire, and more of a better understanding of actually what needs put in place in Oxfordshire to mitigate any risks we identify. And again, I think capacity came up a lot. A lot of the organisations don't have the capacity to do the things that's needed. That we've certainly found out we need to do. So again, having that one person who can coordinate all that, pull together what relevant professionals are needed to get information, gather that information so that we can plan and safeguard those at risk is a real help. Next slide. Okay, so I'm just going to give a bit of a case study about how our structure, and having me as the coordinator, that lead in Oxfordshire, what the positive outcomes are for that. And again, it's not just about identifying the victims, it's about the disruption and prevention work as well. Okay, so then this is, I just wanted to go through the benefits. So if anybody is thinking of going back to their organisations and saying we need a lead, I have worked with other places where they have a lead in each department. I think that's good because again, for me, we have like slavery safeguarding leads. So I know who to contact in that department if I need to know something or need to pass on any information. But again, I think you need that overarching lead in an organisation to make sure that coordination's there. So that single point of contact is key, knowing who to contact. I know when I've delivered training in the past in other roles, a lot of the feedback was, well, we can identify it, but the issue is we don't know where to go with that information. We don't know what to do. So having that pathway or that person that they know they can ring, that can advise on the next steps, is really, really key. It really encourages partnership working. So again, that multi-agency coordination, the ASMART team, it is so good. We all work together so well. We've got a really good relationship now. We bounce off each other, but that sharing of information is key, and there's none of that barrier to that information sharing anymore. And again, it's that joined up approach works really well. And we also find that's better for victims. So again, if we need to do a multi-agency visit, or there's maybe different issues, so there could be an immigration issue, again, there could be an issue with regarding the business. If everybody went off and did their bit, if you like, or their enforcement action without the rest, then that could kind of put victims more at risk, or we lose that opportunity to safeguard victims. So again, in the case study I used, we did involve immigration because it was a lot around the sponsorship work, but had they gone in and done their bit, that would have made the employer aware, and we would have lost that opportunity to help and identify those other victims. So that joined up approach of doing it all together is absolutely key in what I found in safeguarding victims. The process and having the single point of contact also helps with that early intervention. So as soon as there's even a concern, that intervention started, that whole process is started before it gets further down the line. We have a really good understanding of what is happening in Oxfordshire. We know what cases they are. We know what our highest form of exploitation is. We know who the most vulnerable are in Oxfordshire, so we know where to target and focus our work. We also are aware of the perpetrators, how they're recruiting people, and again, we can plot as well where they might move on to, again, so that we can do prevention work. Having a lead also is your link between organisations. So again, somebody might ring and say, oh, I'm supporting such and such. They haven't heard from the police. Do you know anything? I don't, but then I can contact the police. So I can be that link and that conduit, if you like, between all those organisations, which I think is really key. It ensures that communication flow and that the communication keeps going. Again, the expertise and support, if you have a lead and that is all their role is around modern slavery, they are going to have that expertise and knowledge because that's all they do, that's all they need to know, and then they can support you as well. It ensures that statutory duties are being met. I still speak to some people and they don't have an idea of what the NRM is, even though they're first responders. So again, having somebody who's overseeing all that to make sure we are meeting our statutory duties under the Modern Slavery Act is really key. And again, it could even be around your modern slavery statements. So I've helped develop a lot of modern slavery statements for procurement and helped guide them in what they need to do, making sure it's being put on the register and everything. Again, we're always up to date in Oxfordshire with what's happening around modern slavery, not just locally, but nationally. Again, I'm part of a national networks coordinators forum, which is really useful because it's linking in with other coordinators around the UK where we can share good practice and what's happening in other areas. We can do more disruption work. and plan awareness raising activities that also can contribute to our disruption work. So again, in Oxfordshire now, we are doing some weeks of actions. We've got a calendar. Again, lots of different organisations are joining in where we've got different themes. So obviously we've had the care provider. The next one is we're working with DWP and being present at DWP sites. And looking at their cohort, the people who go to job centres. So we're doing things around cookaway, rights to work, and everything like that. Again, I'm coordinating all that and organising it. And again, a lot of people have said they've always wanted to do something like that, but don't have the time to plan for such things. The benefits, I think, are that then there is somebody holding others to account, so making sure that people are doing what they should be, they know their responsibilities. And the biggest benefit is having a modern slave read is a resource to everybody else. Next slide. I think, so they are my contact details if anybody ever wants to get in touch and find out more about our structure, because I didn't have enough time to go into a lot of what I wanted to go into. But I think I'd just like to end and say I'd really recommend, and I'm saying that from somebody who's worked with statutory services in the past on behalf of victims, where I've seen it not work, where this, and I know other areas in our area, if you like, are looking at wanting to replicate what we're doing as well. So I highly recommend that.
Thank you so much, Nicola. That was so insightful. I was writing a million questions to ask. About 10 minutes, so we'll just run through a few of them. So the first is, hi Nicola, I was wondering how frequently your ASMARAC meetings take place. And I think you've answered the second half of the question, which is, and does it look at adults only or children? So yeah, often do these meetings take place? Yeah,
so the ASMARCs are every week, unless we don't have any new alerts, but the ASMARACs are immediately organised within the next couple of days after ASMART. They, depending on what's going on, like the level of crisis or the priority need, we will meet every week, and then we'll go down to every fortnight, every month, until it's all sorted. But we decide as a group at ASMARAC how often we're going to meet.
Right. And does your partnership include commercial and other organisations or suppliers that work with your council? And if so, what kind of support or work would you do with them?
Okay, so at the moment our partnership doesn't include businesses, which I am very keen to progress. I do think we need to do a lot more around businesses, have them involved. One of the things we have been looking at is like Hotel Watch, so having hotels involved, but we're merging with child exploitation around that as well. And again, the support to businesses would be exactly the same. So at the moment, I'm putting together some resources for letting agents, because we've seen a rise in people letting out properties to perpetrate exploitation in them. So again, somebody approached me, that's what's needed. So again, I'm going to be looking at working with letting agents. So regardless of the organisation or the sector, the support is exactly the same for everybody from my role. Hope that's answered that.
Absolutely. Next question is, would it be possible to share a bit more about the training you do? Did you create your own, or did you use an external provider? I'm also particularly interested in examples of where you've tailored training to different departments.
Okay, so the training is my own, and I developed it years and years ago, and I've just throughout the years added to it. And a lot of the training is around, again, having worked with victims most of my career in this sector, working with them to develop the training, because I think it's key to hear their voices, because they're the people that have gone through it. They know what the issues are, what the barriers were. So a lot of it, my training is around indicators, what you do in your role to identify it, but also from a victim's perspective as well. I also do a lot around myths, because there's a lot of myths, especially around adults, or they're adults, they can consent to it, nobody consents to exploitation. So again, it's breaking down those myths that just because it looks as if somebody's consented, it doesn't mean there isn't an offence. And then the bespoke training, so I have done to homeless organisations, drug and alcohol organisations, within local authority departments, procurement, housing, environmental health, the investigations team, which look at fraud, whether that's tenancy fraud, etc. I've done to registered social landlords, housing associations, so anybody that asks for it. But for me, they're all slightly different of what they need to know and what their response should be.
Yeah, absolutely. And did your role exist before you were in it? If not, do you have any advice on how to advocate for getting the resource for a modern slavery lead, or advice on how we might do some of the work without a modern slavery lead?
Okay, so I'm employed by Oxford City Council, and there was an exploitation coordinator, but just dealt with Oxford City Council. And when she was retiring, that's when they looked at, should we have a county-wide resource, and should it look differently? So, as I said, it has changed that I cover Oxfordshire, and an extra part of my role is that disruption work. So I do a lot of disruption work, which wasn't previously done before. What was the second part of the question?
How would you advise on getting one, on getting a slavery lead within an organisation? Or if they, they can't do that, how would you do some of the work without one?
Okay. The other way to do the works, if you can't get a modern slavery lead, is we looked at modern slavery champions, or using, if you have an anti-slavery network. If you haven't, I would highly recommend setting up an anti-slavery network. It doesn't need much doing or setting up, and using that network, all the people around that table to help. So as I said, even though I lead in Oxfordshire, I need that support in doing all the preventative work we're doing, and you do get a good buy-in from other organisations and leads in other organisations. So modern slavery champions is a way of doing that. So I would say model sometimes on the domestic abuse side of things in organisations. They have domestic abuse champions. Do the same for slavery, because again, you might not necessarily have a domestic abuse lead, but everybody leads or have enough people. I think again, to try and get a lead or to put a case forward is like all I've just said, what the benefits are. Actually, as a local authority, community safety is a big thing. It is a crime, so you're preventing a crime, but you will have a better understanding of what it looks like in your area and what you need to do to mitigate that risk. I think reputation is a big one. Again, if it was really high in an area and then it was shown that there wasn't a lot being done around it, then I think reputational damage is a key thing to put forward. Yeah, absolutely.
And actually, we've come to the end of the webinar. If anyone has any further questions, feel free to send them through either in chat or drop me an email, and I can forward them to Nicola, and then we can circulate the responses. This will be recorded, so hopefully you'll be able to share this widely with the participants. So thank you everyone for joining. Just to say that the next webinar is happening on Tuesday, this coming Tuesday, and that will be focusing on supply chain risk mapping. So if you haven't already signed up to that one, please do via the Eventbrite link that I'm posting in the chat right now. But yeah, thank you everyone for joining. And Nicola, just a huge thank you for all the work that you're doing, but also all the learnings that you've shared with everyone on this call as well.
Yeah, and as I said, honestly, get in touch with me. I've helped other people put together funding bids for posts, so I'm happy to do that. But that's between us.
sounds good. Thanks everyone. Have a great afternoon.